The memorial is massive, so large that no one in the library knew how large the memorial was. They just knew that the entire library was built around the memorial, and they knew that the library was the size of the universe. The memorial has countless headstones and countless flowers, each headstone representing a single universe. Not just any universe, but a universe that has died. And the memorials are never ending. You could spend every second of your life looking at every memorial and never come across the same headstone twice. No one knows who made the first memorial, but we knew that when the first librarian made the first records of the Halls of Time, that the memorial of death was there, and as time has gone on, new worlds have been added to the memorial, and as every memorial is added, there are references added to the library around the world. While we don't know who created the Memoria Mortis, we do know who created the reference books for the Lost Worlds. For every headstone in Memoria Mortis, there is a history book of the Lost Universe written by myself, the immortal gravekeeper and student of Grandfather Death. He appears differently to every person, but what every person agrees on is he appears elderly and he appears to be a man. He is friendly, but rarely seen, and he does introduce himself as Grandfather Death, and he has shared a lot of information. And while he does admit to writing the history of every universe that was, is, and will be, he has also said he doesn't know who made the first headstones, because when he came into existence, the first tombstones already existed. On every headstone is the name of the universe that died, when it died, and what caused its death. And the flower that is near the headstone? It's the last flower from that universe, now made immortal so that life can continue beyond the end of all things. Forever memorialized in the halls of time, a never-ending list of names, one that forever grows and is forever cataloged by myself. That is the role I play in the halls of time. I ride with the first librarian, and I am also immortal to serve my task, as I catalog every world that has fallen, to learn from them, and to be able to tell my master where these stories are and how they ended. What I see and what I learned is beyond ends and beginnings. It's stories that will continue long after the last page is turned. A long time ago, before I was in the halls of time, I lived on a planet not too different from Earth, although we called it Diana. One of the many things you will learn as you explore and read about the multiverse is that although names repeat for planets, worlds, and even people, that doesn't mean that it is the same thing. Diana was a planet orbiting a yellow dwarf star with a single moon, so for all intents and purposes, you can think of it like Earth. Back then, I was an office worker drone, one of billions in a world with tens of billions. Back then, the world was so complicated you couldn't focus on anything further out than the weekend, nor on anything further back than the last workday. Still, even then you heard things from the news, or in a rare conversation from a coworker. But even though I could remember having conversations, I couldn't tell you what they were about. I remember being stressed from work. I remember being anxious of the world. I even remember hating my life. But I couldn't tell you why I was stressed and what I was anxious about, nor what about myself that I hated. Funny thing about the epochs that passed, they make all the world-ending stress seem so small. They make the work life and the stress so distant. So much of my life on Diana is forgotten. I have bare associations, a few emotions. I don't even remember my family's names nor faces. Almost anything about Diana I want to remember, I have to read in a book. Even with my own name, I have to read a journal I write to remind myself that I even have a name, and I'm not just the grave keeper. What I can remember is the few crumbs that told me that the end of the world was coming. A few connection from grandfather's death's book on Diana, and what notes I could take from the other witnesses before they died were changed. The earliest thing that I heard that was odd that I could remember was a coworker talking about how their trip to the largest graveyard in the country was canceled less than a week before they could go. Apparently the graveyard was no longer seeing visitors. I remember thinking it was odd, and I moved on with my day. So much more gray time passed. It could have been a few hours or a few years. But I remember hearing it in a citywide announcement that there was now a permanent quarantine around all of the graveyards, mortuaries, and boneyards. The living was no longer allowed to visit the dead. There were protests, a few attacks to try and get into the graveyards, but the military had cordoned those areas off, and they were willing to shoot anyone who got close. They weren't willing to kill anyone who got close. I remarked it was strange, and the news verified that was happening all over the world. If the dead were buried there, the living wasn't allowed near it. No official reasons were given at first, but there were rumors and speculation. Maybe there was a chemical weapon tested on the bodies and now it was leaking into the local groundwater. Maybe there was a plague affecting the bodies that was contagious to the living. What was known was the military went from merely guarding the graveyards to digging them up, burning the bodies in massive crematoriums that cropped up overnight. By that point, cremation was mandatory for everyone who died. While there was some news about further shutdowns of archaeological digs and quarantines of historical battlefields. Whether it was a battle fought a year ago or millennia before, the military quarantined it, and in a rare case of world unification, all countries had refused to fight anymore. Their militaries were focused on quarantine and keeping people out. But by that point, there was too much land and not enough military to keep them all out. Even with police and volunteer guards, they couldn't hold everyone out. And eventually the first videos made it online. One of those videos we preserved all of these millions of years later. The video was made by an urban explorer whose true name had long since been erased, and all we had was a screen name. Seeker was the screen name. Now their name was engraved into an eternity of history because of the video they saved. I wonder if they knew that this was going to be their legacy, if they would have chosen a different name. The video opened with Seeker showing a dark tunnel that led into the Iapetus Cemetery, once a large cemetery in the city before it was quarantined. The tunnel was once part of the old city, and they explained the history of the tunnel and why it was built. Apparently it once connected to the docks, and then it was used for smuggling, before being used to dump bodies to the graveyard during the Red Death. Well, when the door that led to the graveyard was opened, the world got its first glimpse of the end. The dead man who stepped through the gate was half rotted, and when he grabbed Seeker's shoulder, he began to scream at Seeker. Words that felt like nonsense at the time. "There's nothing left. They're coming for us. There's nothing left." The dead man yelled as Seeker held up his hand and he calmly asked the dead man, "Who is coming for us? And what do you mean there is nothing left?" he asked. And that one question guaranteed that Seeker would be remembered in the halls of time. While we have thousands of videos from when the living first met the dead, thousands out of millions of different stories, all from billions of different points of view. But what made Seeker so unique? Two things. First, the fact that he remained calm and asked a question that gave answers and context. And so many others only panicked the first time they saw the returned revenants. And the other thing? The fact we still had his video. I am sure there are other videos where they calmly asked the dead for information, and they got information as well. But we don't have their stories. We just have Seekers, and because his is the only story we have, it becomes a story of great value. The void! The one who peers from the void, and its forces have consumed Gehenna. They have consumed every hell, and they will consume every heaven, every purgatory, every path of reincarnation, until the only thing left to consume is death. And then the void will take Diana, the dead man told Seeker. If there was more he was going to say, it was cut short by the military arriving and shutting the camera down. How the video got onto the net or our archives, I don't know. What I do know is that soon after that video, the news could no longer be contained. Sure, there were skeptics of all kinds. Little stories like a miracle survivor of a terminal cancer, shared as a feel-good story in a world where we needed good news. It was easy to forget the little disclaimer that said the cancer progressed to a stage that science didn't even know was possible, and that they were provincially calling stage 5. There was a lot of stories they tried to spin as feel-good news. Survivor of a submarine implosion on the bottom of the ocean. Just ignore the little blurb that said the survivor was essentially brain dead due to the fact he had no bones left, and he was drowning for weeks, and they couldn't figure out how to get him breathing again. Just focus on the fact he survived. Or the survivor of a school shooting who would have miracle facial reconstruction surgery to help them get back to life. Just ignore the fact that less than 5% of their skull was left, and the doctors have no idea how they were still aware. And then there were the stories that couldn't be spun in a positive light. A young child tries to sacrifice their siblings and parents to the Shadow Man, but even when all of the blood of their bodies was drained, even when every internal organ was removed and burned, even with no brains left in their skulls, they still struggled against their bonds, and a confused child called the police asking how to kill their parents since the Shadow Man was refusing their sacrifice. They even live-streamed it, so it was impossible to suppress. Eventually, the police decided to cremate the struggling forms, declaring it a mercy for the affected, since it was the only way they knew that could kill them. By that point, though, most of us knew the police were just lying to themselves and lying to us. There was no mercy left in cremation, just quiet. Ashes to ashes or dust to dust. The dead were aware, and their soul remained with every single ash and crumb of their being. By that point, Seeker's video was public knowledge as everyone left tried to decipher what was happening. I wasn't sure when the shift happened, but eventually the news stopped reporting the revenants who refused to die. They started reporting on the few people who died and actually stayed dead. This grew many theories and questions. Why would an infant be allowed to pass on, but not the elderly? Why would a renowned soldier for the kingdom be allowed to stay dead when he was stabbed in the guts, but not his assailant? From the few priests and priestesses who actually possessed the gift, they told us there was still a heaven, even though purgatory was now gone, a new domain of the void. They said the gods and angels of every religion fought the void in a battle above our heads, and we could see above in the night sky. Every star represented a god fighting the void, every shimmer an angel, every planet a demigod. Our priests told us to keep our faith and our prayers, and in time they would throw the one who peers from the void back into the pit it crawled from. I don't know if they were lying or if we failed our gods, but considering how many different Dianas I've seen through the years and how few are left floating out in Altus, I think the void was going to win out eventually. By this point, even our most ardent atheist offered prayers to the gods above, We turned our eyes and telescopes to the stars far above to watch the battle between heaven and the void. While some who had the gift claimed they saw the gods and angels directly, the few who tried to turn their eyes onto the void, their gift blinded them, and their minds were seared, leaving them with nothing left of their soul, and still they did not die. So to any who still had the gift, they turned their eyes on the gods, and our astronomers cataloged the stars. And we watched as the heavens above us died a slow and terrible death. It started with the death of the farthest star, Icarus. It exploded into a bright nebula, and in mere hours the nebula dimmed and died, too weak to be seen even by our strongest telescopes. Star after star, world after world, galaxy after galaxy, we watched as our heavens above died before us. Once our astronomers told us that the stars were so distant that even after death, their light was visible for thousands, millions, or even billions of years. They told us that the light of stars long since dead would still shine on us, and that our night sky was full of more invisible stars than we could ever believe, that we just didn't get a chance to see yet, because they would need hundreds or even thousands of years to arrive to us. If the astronomers were correct, then we weren't not watching an epic battle that was occurring in real time. We were watching the mass murder of our universe billions of years ago, and we were just now seeing it. A universe in its infancy, barely taking its first breath and smothered by the void before the cord was even cut. We prayed to our gods for salvation. We prayed to them to keep fighting. We prayed to any power or force out there in the universe to save us as the void grew closer and closer. Whether it was millions or billions of light years, the void closed that distance in mere nights. When one of the last messages from our astronomers revealed one of the last revelations we would get about the void. The pattern wasn't random, and it wasn't from one corner of the universe. The void surrounded the entire universe, and it was annihilating it all from the outermost edges towards Diana at the center. Whatever intelligence behind the void, it wanted to save Diana for last. And this void approaching us came from 5 distinct directions. The darkness that was suffocating the universe. The void was consuming matter, energy, and information. Planets, stars, and black holes alike. It was in the shape of a hand, one larger than the known universe, and it was closing in on our little world faster than light, faster than the expansion of the universe itself. A cosmic horror that would bring the big crunch to the universe far earlier than was initially expected by scientists and priests alike. By this point, it would have been madness in the streets if there was anything left to be mad about. By this point, there was no more dead. Dying now drew less sympathy than a chest cold. Humanity, the only ones affected by this undeath, had nothing left to fight over, nothing left to steal, nothing to argue about anymore. Why steal from a store when it was now given freely? Why bother arguing about homelessness when strangers offered their homes to strangers? We were all dead. We were all in the same grave. There was no more difference between the dead and the living. In those days, it was probably the closest that Diana ever got to utopia. We had food to share. We had stories to tell. People tried new, exciting drugs. People tried experiences they put off their entire lives, only to realize now there is no point in putting it off anymore. And every night we watched the skies above as more and more stars died, as the fingers of the void grew closer to Diana. Even as horrifying as the fall of our stars and the fall of our gods were, it was still beautiful to witness. In our true final days, less than a month before the void classed our world, I found an interesting book in the library. Yeah, even back then I was a big reader and writer. Even back then I was writing in my journal what was happening, and my big apocalypse party was reading the restricted books at the library. I discovered a book supposedly written by an explorer of other worlds back in the olden days. The explorer wrote of ways to access worlds outside of our universe, worlds disconnected from our laws of physics and magic. I thought it was foolish at the time. I figured if such a means did actually exist, someone would have shared it by now. Even though the world as a whole accepted its demise, there was those who resisted in their own ways. Those seen as extremists by those who accepted death. The ones who still prayed in nearly empty churches for their dead gods to keep fighting. The ones who dug bunkers and hoarded supplies in hope that they could avoid the void's touch, even knowing that it was strong enough to wipe out black holes, even those that waited for the void to approach to try and fight it, whether with guns, magic, swords, or with their own fists. They believed it could be fought, and they would be the ones to do so. Still, if they had discovered this, they would have told everyone, right? Surely, unless everyone who found a way out of Diana decided to leave without telling anyone. And with that haunting thought, a flicker of who I was before the tribulations reminded me of a part of human nature I thought I had forgotten. Not everyone was selfish, but enough people were, they would ruin it for everyone else. So I tested the explorer's ritual, a ritual involving keys, crossroads, and mirrors. It worked. I opened a door and my first path. I could see a world unlike my own, a world with trees that grew far larger than on Diana, and in the distance, instead of a horizon, I could see a rising wall, arose above, and then joined above the distant star. The world was an inverted sphere with the sun on the interior, not the exterior. If I knew the world's name, I have long since lost it. But in my excitement, I brought everyone I could think of to the door. It was easy to convince people to follow you, even if they didn't believe that I had found a way out of Diana. They believed that I had found something interesting, and when the populace craved new excitement, they eagerly followed. The first revenant to step through the door fell dead, and he decayed in moments. Death couldn't follow us from this distant world, but death still existed there. And when the news of a place where the dead would be allowed to die and a world beyond the void spread, it spread like wildfire. I told them as long as the door was open, it would remain on this world. And I took to what was left of the net, and I told them how to open their own doors to different worlds. Despite the ritual's simplicity, the world it opened to was random. But by then, we had all decided that even hell was better than void. By then, I decided I would help others. It wasn't enough to just share it on the net. Not everyone could access it. Not everyone would believe it until they could see. And now I had hope in front of the impossible. I was now burdened with responsibility. When there was no way anyone was going to survive, it was easy to let go of guilt and anxiety. Who cared if you misspoke? Who cared if you were rude? Who cared if you were irresponsible? There was no future, so the present was all that mattered. Now, though, I was under the weight of the fact that there was no way I could ever evacuate everyone on Diana. There were tens of billions years ago. Now the population was closer to 100 billion, because the dead were also part of the populace. I was one person, and even if every person who learned how I did it on the net saved 1,000 people, it wouldn't be enough. But even one life saved is an infinity greater than none. An entire world of stories, an entire world of people, and an entire world of hope, all saved in a single life. And I knew I would save as many as I could. In that last month, that is what I did. I traveled from place to place, city to city, kingdom to kingdom, spreading how to open the doors to new worlds. I would open the doors. I would teach others how to do it. I saved a few. I brought death to many more who were eager to die. And for a few, I even brought them life. When the first star died 3 years before, births stopped on Diana. Deaths had been stopped for a while, but no more children were born. Caesarean sections weren't hopeful either, because the infants were stuck in a place of lifelessness. Not death, but not life either. No more souls to be reincarnated, no more to be created, no more souls waiting in heaven. Is leaving mourning parents with their living stillbirths or perpetual pregnancy. When these infants crossed the threshold, they took their first breaths and their first cries. They finally had their souls. A welcome gift from unknown gods, as for the first time in 3 years, they thanked the gods for their blessings. Or the women pregnant for 3 years who finally went into labor as they crossed the threshold, finally able to give birth. The people who cried when they saw stars above for the first time in so long, or those who saw a world without void and who now carried hope once again. After so long without hope, they finally had it again, and it was overwhelming. Every door led to a different world, every path a different salvation. A tiny lifeline in a world of darkness, but I was making many lifelines as I traveled place to place. The night sky grew darker as the void grew closer, savoring our hopelessness and slowing its grip. Unaware of what we were doing, it expected us to be hopeless, to simply wait and die. I think if the void knew what we were doing, it would have crushed us all much earlier. I still remember the night when the last star died. The only light above was Artemis, her silvery glow reflecting her brother's light down at us. Our last gods, Helios, the star, Artemis, the moon, and Diana, the world. While most stars' death felt like a final triumph or hurrah, the fall of the last star was like the 12th stroke of midnight. You knew you weren't going to hear anymore, but you feared what was coming next. By that point, we saw the void's fingers even during the daytime, and we saw it getting closer. This was my last chance to tell people how to open the final doors. But I kept talking myself into staying just a little bit longer. I thought if I had just a few more days, a few more hours, or even just a few more minutes to help more people, I had an obligation to do so. The void was approaching. There was no gods, nor devils to judge me. I had saved countless lives by this point. I knew I had to save myself as well, but I had decided to save as many lives as I could, and I would do so. I would face whatever judgment in whatever world I escaped to. If I could save just one more life, no matter how many I saved, I convinced myself I could save one more. And then I watched Helios die. It was both sudden and it took too long as the fingers of the void gently brushed the distant sun. It was so gentle looking. It was barely visible. A gentle tap, really, as the void's fingers touched the star. And Helios shrank at the touch. The light cooled and weakened like an eclipse, but it wasn't an eclipse. He was getting weaker. It turned from yellow to red to white as it dimmed and weakened. Finally, the sun simply fell into the void's fingers. I cannot describe it any other way. It was like the sphere was reduced to streamers that fell and collected into the void's fingers. Each stream a line of light and fire that disappeared into void, and within minutes we were left with a truly dark sky. The stars were all dead. The sun was dead. And Artemis still was above us, somewhere, but she had no light of herself. She reflected Helios's light back to Diana, so all we could see above us in the sky was Void's fingers. Now it was the final race against the clock, the silent, impossible moment between the 12th and 13th chime of the clock. Diana would freeze without Helios, probably within hours, maybe a couple of days if we were lucky. That was if the void gave us the opportunity. Light took 9 minutes to travel from Helios to Diana. It took only a few seconds from Artemis to Diana. I knew that the void reached Diana, because even though she had no light in herself, I could see lava cracks form in a rough circle far up in the sky. Even though the void slowed its grip, it was still moving so fast, as Artemis went from dark to a flame in moments, and even those flames were consumed by the void. A last defiance against the dying of the light from the last guardian of heaven. Before Artemis was even done falling into the void like her twin brother did, I watched in horror as falling stars lit up the night sky for the very last time. The satellites around Diana were being knocked down to the ground. We had seconds before Diana herself was consumed, and the only thing left was the void. The last door I opened was in front of me, and there was no one else around. I turned to see if anyone else was around, because when I closed the door, not only would the void not be able to follow, but neither would anyone else. For that dark moment, I saw no one else, so I stepped across the threshold, a step into a world of gravestones and a fog as far as I could see. Compared to the world I had come from, it was paradise. And I turned to the door as I began to close it for the last time, and I saw a distant flash. I paused my closing when I saw a man running for the door. He carried a heavy sack with him as he ran towards the door. The last of the satellites burned the last of their light, and the void grew even closer to Diana. But the man would never make it to the door in time, not unless someone ran out towards him. I was alone. The last door I opened was meant for just me, but even knowing that the void was so close, I couldn't close the door. I was already dooming a world. I couldn't doom the man in front of me. I dropped my books to prop the door open as I ran towards the man. Carrying nothing, I moved like a racehorse, and when I reached him, I grabbed one strap of his sack. As we both carried it, we both ran to the last path away from Diana. I wish I could tell you an adventure story about how we barely outpaced the void's fingers by mere moments to watch the ground and atmosphere fall apart from the void's touch as we hopped from floating stone to the door. That wasn't how the void worked. I was aware there was parts of the world I could still see, and there were parts of the world that were just not there anymore. It was miles away, but still it felt so close as we reached the door, and we removed the book of door stops, and I dropped his sack past the threshold, and we slammed the door closed together. All I could hope for every single door leading to every other world was that they were smart enough to close the door before the void arrived. I don't know if the void could invade new universes through those doors, but I didn't want to find out. Now, on our side of the door, I offered my hand to the man and he took it. Welcome to this new world. Tell me, if you will, what is in your sack? I asked the man as he opened his sack, and I saw a pile of books. Books on history, on science, on legends, and short stories from all over Diana. The last records of Diana, the last of our history, the last of our world, except for each other. Ah, I see why you risked your own life for those books, I said as I showed my own books, journals, and records of the void and the last days of Diana. The journal on top was signed with my last name, Elpis. It meant hope. I offered the man a smile as I offered my name to him. My name is Anasadora Elpis. My friends call me Pandora. And your name? I asked him, and he finally spoke to me. My name is Epimetheus Retrospect. Pleased to meet my savior, he said with a nervous laugh, as we turned and we realized we weren't alone among these stone monuments. That was when we met Grandfather Death, and he explained to us about the Halls of Time and the Memoria Mortis. He explained how this place kept track of worlds that died and were dying. What made us unique is that we were the first ones he had ever seen who successfully not only survived the end of their world, but who saved many others. The door we entered through was actually in the memorial for Diana. He told us we could stay as long as we wanted, or we could leave for any world in all that is. And stay we did. Epimetheus kept track of the books. He organized the books I wrote or found among the dying worlds. I wrote the last stories of the dying worlds with Grandfather Death, and I gave others the chance they needed to escape. Sometimes entire worlds would be saved, sometimes only one person, and often entire worlds still died. So here I remained with Grandfather Death, mourning the worlds that died, carrying the melancholy and the hope of entire worlds, sharing their last stories, and my husband would be the one who shared those stories with those who asked for them. His knowledge and his library grew in size, and in time others came to help us. Some were refugees of dying worlds. Others sought us out. Others still, I have no idea where they came from or what they were. I am the gravekeeper. I bury the worlds that have no one else left to bury them. My mentor, Grandfather Death, is the one who collects the last stories of universes for their own judgment. My husband is the head librarian. We care for the dead universes of all that is. When the last being has drawn its final breath in the final universe, we will be there to collect its story and to share it with whatever comes after.